day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. When trouble seems to rain on my dreams, it's not a big deal. Let it wash up the buzz in my windshield. 'Cause you're showing me, and you I'm free, and there's still a refuge that I just got to get to. So I won't let a day go, won't let a day go by. So put the drop top, turn it up, I'm ready to fly. And ooh, there's something about the way sun shines on my face. It's a love so true, I can never get enough of you. And still it can't be wrong. I'm about to get my worship on. Take me away. It's a beautiful day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got no need to worry. I got no room for doubt. Tomorrow's coming at me. Your eyes beat a beautiful, I sing the bell. Ain't no limitations to your amazing grace. Your amazing grace. And there's something about the way your love shines in my face. Oh no, I can never get enough of you. This still can't be wrong. I'm about to get my worship on. I'm gonna sing a brand new song. Yeah, I'm about to get my worship on. Take me away on this beautiful day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Such a beautiful day.
Happy Sunday, everybody. That was Zoe Turner, Young Girl Boss. Wanted to play some music before I get started. So as of last week, we did a segment, we're just starting it out, where you saw Chris Tucker, Oprah, Winfrey, TD Jakes, and also Quincy Jones, just getting to know their heritage, starting at their family tree, starting with them, then moving up. So they got a bit of leadway in understanding what's to come. So this is the second part to it. It's going to be anywhere from about 45 to 50 minutes long. I'll be coming in between times and, saying different things here and then. I may just wait until the end. But this is on the quest for those, not like only myself, but others who may need a little push, inspiration to know and understand who you are, where you came from. What is your history? What is your history? As we all know, every fingertips, as far as what we can see here, when it comes down to our fingerprint, we all are individuals. We don't have the same as our mom, our dad, our brother, our sister. We don't. But when you get into the bloodline, your lineage, that blood actually shows and shares and can show you who you are, and all that is out there for you to find out and just to understand a little bit more. So I started this quest about almost 2 months now, and this is not my lineage in the lineup of me finding out, but it actually is inspiring me. I saw these videos probably about 2 years ago, and it stuck with me. So I never knew that 2 years later I'll be sharing this, a part of my quest, and to also inspire others to get out there, start looking, get your DNA tests done, get your family tree in place, so you can leave a rich heritage to your kids, grandkids, great grandkids to come. God allowed us to live in this world for another 100 years or 200 years or 300 years or 400 years. We least should owe them that. Money will come and go, but history will always be. Always be. So for those who don't know who I am, I'm Darlene Pierce Noble. I am the CEO and founder of Infinity Powerhouse, which stands for Models Talent Media. And also when it comes down to magazines and all that great stuff. But we want to add some other under the umbrella. I have a TV network which it's on YouTube, which will line up all of what the different things that I do will be under each area. So I want to thank those who just tuning in or been here all along the way. I'm grateful that you are here with me, and thanks. And I hope that this will help you to see a little clearly of what is needed and what is this type of format will take, and where it will take you as a person. So we're going to go ahead and start it up. So as you see here, 9 remarkable African Americans. So we just covered 4 so far. So let's see what's going to bring us this time.
African American Lives is made possible by...
She has her great-great-great-grandmother's eye for adornment. He is fit and agile, like his forefathers. Like his ancestors before him, he is the neighborhood's best cook. Discovering our past helps us understand how we came to be who we are today. The Coca-Cola Company is proud to join the exploration.
Awake and rise up, young ones, old timers, 30 and 40 someones, baby boomers and love bloomers. A new day is among us. Rise up and smell the sense of life and liberation. Rise up and stroke the canvas, letting the whole world feel your rich, dark past. And at last, here's your chance to climb to the mountaintop and inhale the aroma. Savor the flavor. Rise up and awake to a new morning, a new life, a new love, and liberation. After all, isn't that the best part?
Folgers celebrating our heritage.
At the end of the Civil War, 4 million African Americans were finally freed from bondage. Free in theory, at least, to take charge of their own lives, to buy property, to get an education, to reunite their families. Among them were my own ancestors, and the ancestors of the 8 guests whose family stories I'm tracing back into history. Until recently, it was virtually impossible to discover much about our family members who had once been slaves. But today, genealogical research and DNA analysis allow us to understand how our ancestors made that incredible transition from slavery to freedom.
I'm amazed by how much we accomplished. You had communities who took care of themselves, who were self-sufficient when they had very little to begin with. So to me, it's a tribute to fortitude.
Sometimes history gives us stats and figures and names, but it's not just a gathering of data, but it's a gathering of hearts and tears and souls that makes us sing like we do and clap like we do and dance like we do and live like we do. It's because we suffered like we did.
This building that I now come to every day that I own it because of people like them, whose names I don't even know.
Absolutely.
But who not just paved the way, but created the way.
Learning our ancestors' names and uncovering their life stories depend upon detailed detective work. Since I was 10 years old, I've been trying to find out how my own great-great-grandmother, a former slave named Jane Gates, carved out a life for herself in her first years of freedom. To continue that quest, I've returned to Cumberland, Maryland, where Jane Gates lived when she was freed from slavery. The Gates family has called Cumberland home ever since. To help me, I brought along my father, Henry Louis Gates Sr.
It's at Green Street next exit.
He's 92 years old, but he still remembers everything.
We can do this one right, yeah. I remember. Yeah.
Make a left here. You know where you are now, don't you?
Yeah, this is home. This is like 10,000 Gateses.
Here on Green Street, Jane owned her own home, which is quite remarkable for an ex-slave, and especially for a single woman. According to family legend, Jane's house was given to her by her former master, an Irishman named Samuel Brady.
Right here, this White House.
This
right?
White House here?
Yes.
Now, all this time I came to Cumberland, I didn't know that that was Jane's house. It was a nice house. Now, how did you know that the Bradys gave her that land? I mean, where did you hear that story?
My grandmother and grandfather.
They told you?
Yeah. Evidently, the slave owner was the father of the children, of Jane's children.
Such a modest house today, maybe, but it looks like a palace to me. This is the first home owned by any of my ancestors. It was acquired by Jane Gates, my great-great-grandmother, in 1870. 1860, she's a slave. 10 years later, she's a property owner. Jane has assumed almost mythic status in my family because of that, and I'm determined to find out about her. First, I want to verify the story that Brady gave Jane her house. So I've come to the Allegheny County Courthouse, which holds local property records going back hundreds of years. I'm meeting my cousin, John Gates, our family historian. He's finally tracked down the deed to Jane's land and discovered something quite unexpected.
This is it. This deed was made 31st day of August in the year of 1800.
Jane wasn't given the house, she bought it.
For $1,400.
It's a lot of money, man.
Wow. A lot of money.
Now, did you find any evidence that she borrowed the money, maybe like a mortgage or something?
No, and I still think that Brady was involved. Brady was a huge landowner, owned a lot of slaves. I think Brady gave her the money. I don't know any other way she'd have this amount of money.
She didn't get it. She didn't save the money as a slave.
Yeah, exactly. From her buying that property on Green Street, and then her sons, your grandfather, great-grandfather, it just started that, and they started buying property. So we used to own property
up and down Green Street.
Up and down Green Street.
However she raised the money so soon after slavery, Jane clearly understood that owning land was the key to her security and that of her family.
Land is critical in the 19th century. Land is a source of wealth. Nobody knew this better than former slaves. They had worked the land. Their parents, their grandparents had worked the land. They had seen the land make their owners rich. If you can own property, you can be independent, meaning you can have a family, meaning that nobody can lean on you and tell you where to go to church, meaning nobody can tell you how to vote. You are an independent person. That's the meaning of freedom.
The truth is, few freed slaves would ever own land. We did find the story, however, of one courageous attempt in the family tree of the actress and comedian Whoopi Goldberg.
I believe he's gonna like me.
To tell her what we've learned, we're starting with the oldest ancestors she knew well. You know who that is?
That's Malachi.
That's your grandfather?
That's my grandfather. I know that face anywhere.
Now, you called him Malachi?
Yeah.
How come you called
Because
him?
during the war he went to France. And all the French girls, didn't call him Malachi. He came back, so they called me Malachi. So he became Malachi. And that's how I knew him.
I don't blame him.
Yeah.
I would have become Malachi, too.
Yeah, but he's big, tall, beautiful man.
He was handsome.
Yeah, he was. I remember him, and I have his smile.
Thank God you don't have his mustache.
Well, not this week. Some weeks you just...
Now, did your parents or grandparents ever tell you stories about your great-grandparents?
No.
Not one story?
Not one story.
Did you go to the South?
No, I didn't go to the South.
Did your family talk about this? I mean, your ancestors came from the South.
And they never talked about it.
You know, folks didn't really talk unless you were in a talking kind of family where you shared information and stuff. You just were in the dark 99% of the time.
No, that's true.
You know,
They were just busy living.
Yeah. I don't think they ever thought that there was any reason to figure out where we'd come from.
So we use census records to trace one side of Whoopi's family, through Malachi, back to her great-great-grandparents, both of whom were born into slavery. Now, this is a page of the 1870 federal census, and here we find William and Elsa Washington. This is the first time that African Americans are listed by name, because, as you know, all of our ancestors who were slaves just had one name. Now, your great-great-grandmother Elsa had given birth to 16 children, of whom 14 were still living. We can see it all on your family tree. Here, William Washington, Elsa Tucker, and all of these, all these names in red,
my goodness,
are their children. Can you imagine having 16 kids?
No.
Right there, I said, Lord.
I barely got through one.
And this is where they lived, right there in Alachua County, Florida. In the 1870s, Alachua County was poor, rural, and underdeveloped. As Florida history experts Joe Konech and Joel Buchanan explain,
Alachua County is pretty much like the rest of Florida, a frontier at this particular time. Florida had a very small population compared to other states. It was more like Arizona was in the Wild West.
You might think that this would be an easy place for the Washingtons to acquire land, but not so.
It was rare to be successful because, other than squatting, which was illegal and was likely to get you in trouble, it takes capital to buy land. You have to have something. And most slaves, most black men and women came out of slavery with very, very little.
Near the end of the Civil War, General Sherman promised slaves 40 acres of tillable land. That's the origin of the famous phrase, 40 acres and a mule. But few slaves got their land, let alone a mule. Fortunately, the Reconstruction Congress offered people like the Washingtons another opportunity. Now look at this.
Here's the certificate, 1550, United States of America, in the district of land subject to sale in Gainesville, Florida. Now, in English, what does this say?
In English, it's extraordinary. The Homestead Act was a revolutionary concept for redistributing land.
The Southern Homestead Act was a piece of legislation passed by Congress in 1866 that set aside something on the order of 46 million acres, primarily in southern states of Florida, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana.
To claim an 80-acre parcel of this land, the first step was to select a lot and then pay a $5 filing fee, which wasn't as easy as it sounds.
It was not administered very smoothly. It was hard. You had to travel to find an open office. You had to travel to inspect the land in order to select the land you wanted to file on. It was a bit of an administrative nightmare.
We found evidence that William and Elsa did manage to beat the odds and file a claim.
This is the Register of Entries for the Land Office in Gainesville, Florida, and this is November 1873. Notice down here we have William Washington, who received lots 1 and 2, which total 104.50 acres.
But filing a claim was just the beginning. Now, the really hard part began.
Well, according to the Homestead Act, you had to, of course, build a dwelling to live in. You had to make some kind of improvements. You had to enclose the land, improvements being plowing the land, planting a crop, making sure that you have a harvestable, a saleable crop.
All of his livelihood has been on a plantation or sharecropping where the person provided everything for him and all he was manpower. Now I'm no longer manpower. I am the owner of the land. I must cultivate this land. I must build a house. I have a family. So I think some of the problems he had was, where do we get income from? Where do I get the seeds to plant my crop? How do I harvest the crop and the equipment?
To make things even more difficult, William and Elsa Washington had only 5 years to prove their claim. It would be no easy feat. But this wasn't the only obstacle that they faced. We often forget that the majority of the former slaves could not read or write.
People sort of take it for granted, you know, that, oh, how come you folks could read? You could get killed for reading.
That's right.
You know, to actually learn how to read is incredible.
We can begin to understand the importance of education to our ancestors through a moving story about one of Oprah Winfrey's relatives. Now, Constantine, your great-great-grandfather, was born October 1836 near Lookout Mountain in Georgia. Now, this is the 1870 census right here.
Okay.
And these are your relatives.
Okay, this is Winfrey Constantine and Winfrey Violet, 35. Winfrey Constantine was 35, male, black.
Yeah.
Place of birth, Georgia.
Right.
Farmer.
And?
Cannot read.
That's
Cannot
right.
write, yeah.
Now hold that thought. Now look at the column in the 1880 census. Just follow Constantine over there under literacy.
Okay. He can read.
And he can write. In 10 years, Constantine
learned to read and write?
He has taught himself
Okay.
to read and write.
And that's mastering literacy while he's still having to work as a farmer
That's
every
right.
day,
Pick cotton,
earn a living.
whatever in the world he was
take
doing.
care of the family, yeah.
With the coming of freedom, these former slaves wanted more than anything the tools to maintain that freedom, to prosper in that freedom. They wanted education. They wanted education for themselves. They wanted education for their children.
Finally, that goal was within their reach. After the Civil War, the Southern states opened public schools, free schools for blacks and whites, for the very first time. Still, it's hard to imagine how Constantine Winfrey managed to learn to read and write in less than a decade while struggling to eke out a living for his family.
One of the ways in which an older person would acquire literacy skills would be to attend evening schools. Evening schools were commonplace, and they were packed with older men and women who knew that, really understood deeply the power of education, of the need to be able to read a contract, to check the math on a store account, to understand whether they were being cheated or whether their employer was paying them fairly and justly.
The Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, commonly known as the Freedmen's Bureau, also played an important part in establishing schools for former slaves like Constantine Winfrey. But our people didn't depend only upon governmental assistance.
Most black schools began when free people themselves got somebody in the area who was somewhat literate to begin teaching others. Again and again, Freedmen's Bureau agents arrived to find a school already in operation. There seems to have been a kind of expectation that anyone who had any scrap of literacy would share it with others.
As much as our ancestors needed land and literacy to rebuild their lives, their most important task was to reconstruct their families. One of the harshest aspects of slavery was that it tore entire families apart. Parents and children could be bought, sold, or given away at their owner's will. Still, our people managed to emerge from slavery with a strong sense of family ties intact. This is certainly true of Dr. Ben Carson's family. Ben, a former classmate of mine from Yale, is the head of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. He saved countless children's lives. Most famously, Siamese twins joined at the brain. Remember, I was born in 1950. So you were born in 1951.
Right.
All smart little color boys were supposed to be doctors.
Right.
But you were a poor kid. You're inner city poor kid.
Right.
How did you have the self-confidence to think that you actually could become a doctor?
Well, at that time, when I decided I wanted to be one, I didn't. But you know how kids are. You know, you go and you ask an 8-year-old, what do you want to do? I want to be president of the United States. I want to be an astronaut. And I don't really think about all the things that are necessary to do it. But, you know, my mother, who only had a 3rd grade education, encouraged me. And she said, you know, you can do anything you want.
Ben's mother, Sonia Copeland, and her brothers, Eddie and John, come from a large family in Georgia.
Robert Jr. These was taken when Daddy died. This Eunice, Jean.
Sonia left the South as a teenager. After that, her siblings moved all over the country.
Now, how many children they had in all? Can you remember?
About 6.
9. 9. Larger family, you had more of a...
Workers.
Workers.
They gave you veggies and they didn't give you no money.
You worked just for food?
Yeah. That's what they call sharecropping.
Y'all should have followed me around.
That's why they call it sharecropping.
You know why I did the wrong thing for leaving you guys? I should have been shaking them up. They would have did the right thing.
My parents got married when my mother was 13. And my father was quite a bit older than she was, but they moved from rural Tennessee to Detroit. He was working in a factory. And of course it was during that time that my mother discovered that he had another family.
Oh, that must have been really painful.
She had to work very, very hard. Many times, she would leave the house at 5 or 6 in the morning. And she wouldn't get home until 11 or 12 at night, going from one job to the next.
What kind of work did she do?
She was domestic. That was extremely difficult for her, but, she would leave instructions for us. We didn't always do it, but she left instructions. No, but for the most part, we tried actually very hard not to disappoint her because we knew how hard she was working and we knew that she was doing it for us.
Curiously, Ben's mother's hardships echo a tragic story of separation that we discovered in his family over 100 years earlier.
John H. Copeland, a former slave, born June 1858 in Shiloh, Harris County, Georgia.
Now, he is your great-grandfather, John.
Correct.
John H. Now, there was a very wealthy family of white slave owners named Copeland. Between them, man, they owned 15,000 acres and well over 100 slaves. And when William Copeland Sr. died in 1859, his slaves were divided into 5 numbered lots. The lot numbers were written on pieces of paper and then shaken up in a hat. And each heir reached in, they pulled out a number, and that number represented a group of African American human beings. Now, looking at these documents, it seems certain that the slaves were divided by dollar value and not by family relationships. So they divided families up that way. Your ancestor, John, was only 2 or 3 years old at the time. And there he is, identified in 1859 in this estate division. John must have had to leave his home and his mother and family.
Yeah, it makes you want to cry to think that that would happen to anybody, much less somebody who was related to you.
And a 2 or 3 year old little boy.
I mean, you can just imagine how incredibly difficult and painful it had to be. Suppose you transport us back and we've been slaves. You know how hard my mother worked to try to make a life for us, and then somebody comes along and just takes us away. I just can't even imagine.
When freedom came 6 years later, Ben's ancestor, John H. Copeland, was finally free to seek out his family. But he was just a little boy. It was by no means certain that he would find them.
If you look at the Reconstruction period from the former slaveholders' point of view, one of the things that these former slaveholders bemoan is the fact that these slaves are wandering the roads aimlessly. They just walk up and down the roads. We don't know what. Well, they're not wandering the roads aimlessly. They're searching for family and friends who have been sold away. They're looking for any information they can find that will give them some clue as to where they might go to find their mother or father or long-lost child.
It's hard for us to comprehend the enormity of the challenges that our ancestors faced during these years. I often wonder how much control my own great-great-grandmother, Jane Gates, had over her life. Somebody had to give her that money, probably the white guy who fathered her children. I mean, her children clearly were fathered by a white man.
Clearly. She's also listed in one of the earlier censuses that she's mulatto herself. But definitely the father was white. No doubt about that.
He was white or light and bright and damn near white.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
My dad and I have come to ask his younger sister, my Aunt Helen, if she knows anything that could advance our investigation.
She's older than me. She remembers stuff that I can.
She doesn't look at Daddy.
She was much older. I called her Miss Helen until I was 16 years old.
Having a dream.
What do you know about Jane Gates?
I know that she was our great-grandmother and that she lived up the street from where we live, about 3 houses up.
Who did they say fathered her children?
Brady's.
The Brady's.
Mm-hmm.
So they were the white people who owned her.
Yeah,
when she
and
was
they
a slave.
and then they lived in Cresaptown.
And they lived in Cresaptown. Now, how in the world did she get enough money 5 years after the end of the Civil War to buy all that house?
I don't know.
Same old story, still no proof.
We were related to.
To try to find that, I've turned to a professional genealogist, Jane Ailes, who specializes in the records of Maryland and West Virginia, where the Gateses and the Bradys have lived for generations. By an unbelievable coincidence, Jane Ailes is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Samuel Brady.
Oh, wow.
If Samuel Brady did father Jane Gates' children, then Jane Ailes and I are cousins.
The legend about Skip's family that I heard seemed very compelling, and it was a story that had been in his family for a very long time, and there could be truth to the story. I learned a few things about Jane Gates as I went along, and I tried to get a feeling for who she was. In the census record, she says that she's a nurse and a seamstress, and in 1870, she has 2 of her own children living in her household and her grandchildren. She must have been a very strong person to have persevered through all the things that she did.
Searching for a connection between the Gates household and Samuel Brady led Jane Ailes to revisit some documents that have been in her family for generations. Samuel Brady's personal papers, which date from the time of slavery.
I looked through every scrap of paper in those, and there's quite a few, and I couldn't find anything that mentioned a Gates or Jane, anybody. Then I started branching out and looking at his family.
Hey, Jane.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
The Wizard of West Virginia.
I started looking in the rest of the Brady family, thinking that maybe she came to Samuel from part of his other family, because he had one brother who owned slaves, John, and I found some very interesting things in John Brady's estate papers. Okay, here is his inventory and appraisal, which was taken in January of 1851.
Okay. God, the slaves are listed right under shucks of corn. I mean, they really were property. They were corn, there's wheat, there's husks, and then Negro. What's it? Negro?
Negro man. His name is Lewis.
Okay.
And here's Jane with 2 children.
Is that my Jane?
I don't know. We have a little more evidence here.
Okay.
It tells us a little bit more about her.
No age.
No age on this paper, just simply a list and what she's worth. But also in that year, in 51, they had to rent out all of the slaves, okay? And so this is a list of the rentals. Jane is on the list, and she rents for the year for $5, and she is rented to James M. Brady.
Oh, my goodness.
Who is John Brady's son.
Right.
They rented the slaves every year, and so here's the rental for 1853 to 54. And here's Jane.
$26 an hour.
She rented for $26
That's
for the year.
That's a big boost from
That's a big
$5.
jump
That's
from
right.
$5.
And then in 1855, here's another rental list, and she goes again to James Brady for $75.
Wow, she climbed up the ladder.
I can't understand why her value's going up geometrically.
Well, it's an auction, and so she was.
So people came to bid on them.
Right, exactly. It was an auction.
So he wanted her very badly.
And so now we jump from 1855 to the 1860 census.
Okay.
And here is Hannah Brady, who is John Brady's widow.
Right.
And in her household is Jane.
Jane.
And she's 41 years old.
And our Jane was born in 1819, so that could be Jane.
We can say that this is a possibility.
So this could be the Brady connection we're after. But I still don't know how Jane was able to buy her home. What I do know is that she did it in turbulent times. By 1876, 11 years following the end of the Civil War, former Confederates regained power in the South. For Whoopi Goldberg's ancestors, trying to prove their homestead claim in Florida, what had been a tough prospect became an even more difficult challenge.
Acquiring land was difficult. Keeping land was probably even more difficult. You had to pay taxes on that land. You had to make sure that you turned out a profitable crop every year.
Under these conditions, many homesteaders were forced into debt. To find out if the Washingtons were among them, we visited Jim Powell at the Alachua County Clerk's office.
People mortgaged everything you can think of, from their crops to their mules, just everything they had, their wagon, anything. This, page 208, is a mortgage for William Washington, which this was 40 acres of their 104. Everybody that was anybody was trying to do something that didn't have money, had mortgages, had credit, and it seemed to roll over and over and over.
Problems that black farmers had on top of that were being surrounded by people who did not want you to be independent.
You have still the resentment of the Southerns who lost their plantation, lost their servants, lost their manpower. And so there's a resentment between the black-white world. So you have a lot of confrontation.
There was a lot of violence in this particular time period. There's very little cash. There's a lot of tension. There are people who want the goods that are here.
The Klan is active at this time. There are a whole variety of regulator organization, Whites of the Night Camellia.
The Washingtons, certainly they would have faced terror. They had to struggle tremendously hard to gain the land, to make that land productive, and then to keep that land.
I mean, I wonder if they could have imagined your life.
No, they couldn't have. I think about the fact that had these guys been born in this time, who would they have become?
Of the 3,000 African Americans who filed homestead claims in Florida, only 1 in 10 was able to withstand these pressures. Would William and Elsa Washington be among them? Meanwhile, another target of those trying to stall the progress of ex-slaves was education. With the end of Reconstruction, state governments segregated public schools, and funding for black education completely disappeared. Former slaves were now dependent on their own resources and imaginations. People like Oprah Winfrey's great-great-grandfather, Constantine Winfrey. Can you read this report from the school board?
This is from the Montgomery County School Board. Okay, in 1906.
That's right.
On petition, it was ordered that Spring Hill Schoolhouse in Beat 5 be moved to a point on Constantine Winfrey's place.
Constantine, your great-great-grandfather,
had a
moved
school.
The entire schoolhouse so that children in the town, the colored children, could get an education. Your great-great-grandfather not only embraced education himself, he emphasized education to the rest of the entire town.